Welcome to our deep dive into the world of disputes, conflicts, and problems. You might be surprised to learn that these terms, often used interchangeably, actually have very distinct meanings, especially when we're talking about legal contexts.
That's right. It's not just semantics. Understanding these nuances can actually have a real impact on how you approach disagreements and how you think about them.
Okay, so let's unpack this. What exactly is the difference between a dispute, a conflict, and a problem?
Well, think of a dispute as a disagreement that is focused on specific points of contention. So, for example, imagine two parties are disagreeing on how to interpret a clause in a contract.
Yeah.
That's a dispute. It's a clash of interests, values, or rights.
So disputes often involve legal rights, which is why they end up in court.
Exactly. Disputes often center around legal rights and obligations, so that makes the legal system a very common arena for trying to resolve them.
Makes sense. Okay, so what about conflicts? How do they differ from disputes?
Conflict is a much broader concept, and it encompasses a wider range of disagreements, tensions, and incompatibilities. Um, think of it like the breeding ground from which disputes may arise. So you might have conflict between team members with differing work styles, even if it hasn't escalated into a formal dispute yet.
So conflict is like that underlying tension, and a dispute is a specific disagreement that comes out of that tension.
Precisely. And here's a key point. Not all conflicts necessarily lead to disputes. Many can be resolved through communication and collaboration before they reach that point.
Gotcha. And where do problems fit into all of this?
Problems are situations that present challenges or obstacles, but they don't necessarily involve a disagreement between parties. To think about a natural disaster.
Okay,
It's a problem that everyone faces collectively, regardless of individual interests or opinions.
I see. Okay, so I'm starting to see these distinctions. But why are these differences so important? How does understanding them actually help us?
Well, there's a couple of reasons why it really matters. Firstly, using precise language helps us to communicate more effectively about disagreements. So if everyone understands the nature of the issue, whether it's a dispute, a conflict, or a problem, it leads to much clearer conversations and more targeted solutions.
That makes sense. Misdiagnosing a problem as a dispute could lead to unnecessary legal action when maybe a simple conversation would have been enough.
Exactly. And secondly, recognizing the specific type of disagreement helps us to choose the right resolution approach. So understanding whether it's a contractual dispute, a conflict over resources, or a problem that needs collaborative problem solving, all of that's crucial for selecting the most effective tools and strategies.
It's like using the right tool for the job. Having the wrong approach will probably just lead to an unsuccessful outcome.
Precisely. Now, before we kind of delve deeper into dispute resolution, it's interesting to note that the concept of resolving conflict isn't actually a new thing. Many indigenous cultures have long-standing traditions of dispute resolution, such as, yarning circles.
That's a fascinating point. It highlights that seeking peaceful resolutions to disagreements is something that's been deeply ingrained in human history, you know? It's not simply a modern legal invention.
Yeah. It is indeed. And these traditional processes, they often prioritize community involvement and consensus building. So they offer really valuable insights for modern dispute resolution practices. They really underscore the enduring human need to find ways to address conflict constructively.
Okay, I think we've established a really solid foundation for understanding these core differences.
Mhm.
Now, let's shift our focus to the legal world. Why are dispute resolution processes so essential in the field of law, particularly given its traditional emphasis on litigation?
That's a great question. And it leads us to the heart of why these distinctions actually matter, especially in a legal context. Traditionally, the legal system relied heavily on litigation, so court proceedings, to resolve disputes. However, this approach has its limitations.
Yeah, I mean, court cases are often portrayed as these lengthy, expensive battles that can even exacerbate conflict and damage relationships.
You're right. Litigation can be extremely costly and time-consuming, and the adversarial nature of court proceedings, well, sometimes it can escalate conflicts and damage relationships, even when a resolution is reached. And this is where alternative dispute resolution, or ADR, comes into play. So ADR encompasses a range of processes that are designed to help parties resolve disputes outside of traditional court proceedings.
That reminds me of Professor Green's groundbreaking 1978 article, Settling Large Case Litigation. His work really challenged the legal profession to embrace ADR, didn't it?
Absolutely. Professor Green's case study really demonstrated the limitations of a purely adversarial approach. And he advocated for what he called a hybrid dispute resolution model, which blended elements of negotiation, mediation, and neutral evaluation. And this could save substantial time and money compared to traditional
And
litigation.
it's worth noting that many disputes are now resolved entirely outside a court, aren't they? People are increasingly using methods like negotiation and mediation without ever even commencing legal proceedings.
That's right. That's a key trend, and it's largely driven by this growing awareness of the benefits of ADR. So these processes, they emphasize consensus building and collaboration, empowering parties to actually work together to find mutually acceptable solutions. And they offer more flexibility and control, allowing parties to tailor the process to their specific needs and circumstances.
It's interesting to consider specific examples of ADR in action, like early neutral evaluation, where an impartial expert provides an assessment of the case early on. This can help parties reach a settlement much more quickly.
Exactly. Early neutral evaluation offers a reality check, helping parties understand the strengths and weaknesses of their own positions, and it encourages them to consider realistic settlement options.
And have there been any legislative changes that support this shift towards ADR?
Yes, absolutely. Legislative changes have played a crucial role in promoting ADR. For example, the Civil Dispute Resolution Act of 2011, or CDRA, emphasizes this overarching obligation to resolve disputes amicably, and it often mandates pre-filing dispute resolution attempts before going to litigation.
So the CDRA is essentially encouraging a more collaborative approach to dispute resolution.
Precisely. It recognizes that litigation should be a last resort, not the default option. Similar rules exist at the state level, such as the Uniform Civil Procedure Rules of 1999 in Queensland. These rules often require parties to certify that they have considered ADR options before they file a claim in court.
These legal frameworks really underscore this shift towards a more collaborative and less adversarial approach to resolving disputes. It seems that dispute resolution is becoming more important not just in the legal sphere, but in society as a whole. What has led to this increased need for dispute resolution skills and processes beyond the courtroom?
That's a great observation, and it's something we'll delve into in the next part of our deep dive. The need for dispute resolution skills has indeed skyrocketed in recent decades, and this is due to a convergence of factors.
I'm eager to learn more about those factors and how they're shaping the landscape of conflict resolution in our increasingly complex world. But for now, let's take a pause and just reflect on what we've learned so far about these crucial distinctions between disputes, conflicts, and problems. Understanding these nuances is really the first step towards becoming more effective communicators and problem solvers.
Well said. Recognizing the specific nature of a disagreement allows us to choose the right tools and strategies for addressing it, whether it's through negotiation, mediation, or other collaborative approaches.
And as we move forward, it's essential to keep in mind that conflict, while often challenging, is a natural part of human interaction. By developing the skills and mindset to engage in conflict constructively, we can transform disagreements into opportunities for growth, understanding, and positive change. We'll continue our exploration of these themes in the next part of our deep dive, where we'll examine the factors driving the increased need for dispute resolution skills in today's world. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive. We just explored those key differences between disputes, conflicts, and problems. Now, I'm really curious to learn more about what's driving the increasing need for dispute resolution skills in society as a whole.
Yeah, you're right to be curious. It's a trend that's really reshaping how we interact and address disagreements across, all aspects of our lives. Several factors have converged to kind of create this heightened need for effective dispute resolution.
Let's dive into those factors then. What are some of the key forces at play here?
Well, one major factor is globalization and interconnectedness. As we interact more and more with people from diverse cultures and backgrounds, well, the potential for misunderstandings and conflicts, it naturally increases.
Yeah, it's like the world is getting smaller in a way, with more opportunities for both collaboration and friction.
Exactly. Increased interaction across borders and cultures, all facilitated by technology and global trade, it's led to a much more complex social fabric. And this complexity, it brings with it a greater likelihood of differing perspectives, values, and interests, all of which can lead to conflict.
And it's not just about cultural differences, is it? The sheer complexity of modern life itself seems to be a breeding ground for disputes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The complexity of modern life is another significant driver. Disputes often involve these intricate technical, social, or economic issues that demand specialized resolution approaches.
Yeah, I can see that. Whether it's negotiating a complex business deal or resolving a conflict within a community organization, having strong dispute resolution skills is really essential for navigating these challenges effectively.
Precisely. Modern problems, they often require these interdisciplinary solutions. Dispute resolution processes need to adapt to address these complexities, and
Yeah.
that calls for skilled facilitators and creative approaches.
And there's another factor that you mentioned earlier, the erosion of traditional authority.
Yeah.
How does that contribute to the need for better dispute resolution skills?
Well, the erosion of traditional authority is a crucial element in this equation. People are less likely to simply defer to authority figures now, and instead they demand more control over dispute resolution processes. They want to be active participants in finding solutions that work for them.
This reminds me of Dr. Christopher Moore's work on conflict dynamics. He's emphasized several key drivers of disputes, hasn't he?
Yes, he has. Dr. Moore's concept map highlights factors like the scarcity of resources, power imbalances, and differing values and attitudes, all common triggers for conflict. Understanding these drivers is crucial for actually addressing the root causes of disagreements and finding, lasting resolutions.
So it's not enough to just address the surface level disagreement. We need to go deeper into the underlying causes and dynamics.
Exactly. Effective dispute resolution requires an understanding of the context, the history, and the motivations of the parties involved. And this is where skills like active listening, empathy, and the ability to analyze power dynamics, all that becomes essential.
It sounds like we're moving away from a one-size-fits-all approach to dispute resolution
You're right.
and moving towards more nuanced and tailored strategies.
Precisely. The days of simply imposing a solution or relying solely on positional bargaining, those days are fading. We need more sophisticated approaches that account for the complexities of modern conflicts.
So given these trends, what does this all mean for us as individuals navigating a world that's increasingly characterized by conflict and complexity? What skills do we need to develop to actually thrive in this environment?
Well, it underscores the critical importance of developing communication and negotiation skills.
Hmm.
Effective communication forms the bedrock of any successful dispute resolution process.
I completely agree. Being able to clearly articulate your perspective, listen actively to others, and find common ground, they're all essential skills for managing disagreements constructively.
Precisely. And it's not just about communication techniques, it's also about developing emotional intelligence. Being aware of your own emotions and those of others. It's crucial for de-escalating conflict and building rapport.
Speaking of emotional intelligence, Dr. Bernard Mayer's analysis of conflict avoidance techniques is quite insightful. He's identified several patterns of behavior that people use to try to steer clear of conflict, some of which can be quite detrimental in the long run.
That's right. Dr. Mayer's work highlights tactics like aggressive avoidance, where individuals might use intimidation to shut down conversation, or avoidance through surrogates, where people deflect responsibility onto others. And while these strategies might offer temporary relief, they ultimately hinder productive conflict resolution.
Yeah, it's like sweeping the problem under the rug. It might seem easier in the moment, but it only makes the issue fester.
Yeah.
And then it potentially resurfaces later in a more destructive form.
Exactly. Avoiding conflict altogether is rarely a sustainable solution. Instead, we need to equip ourselves with the skills and the mindset to actually engage in conflict constructively, understanding that disagreements are a natural part of human interaction.
So it seems like we're at a crossroads. The traditional methods of resolving disputes, especially in the legal realm, they're being challenged by a changing world.
Hmm.
And we, as individuals, we need to adapt by developing this new set of skills to navigate conflict effectively in all aspects of our lives.
You've hit the nail on the head. This is a pivotal moment where understanding the nuances of disputes, conflicts, and problems and developing effective resolution strategies. All of that is no longer a specialized skill set, but an essential life skill.
So where do we go from here? What are some key takeaways for our listeners who want to become more adept at navigating disagreements and finding common ground?
Well, first and foremost, remember those distinctions we discussed earlier. Accurately identifying the nature of the disagreement is really the first step towards effective resolution. So is it a dispute over specific rights or interests? Or is it a broader conflict that's rooted in differing values or communication breakdowns? Once you have a clear understanding of the situation, you can choose the most appropriate approach.
That makes perfect sense. It's like having a toolbox filled with different tools.
Yeah.
You need to know which tool is best suited for the task at hand.
Exactly. And just as a skilled craftsperson hones their tools, we need to continuously develop our communication, negotiation, and emotional intelligence skills. These are muscles that grow stronger with practice.
So it's not a one-time fix. It's an ongoing commitment to personal growth and development.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that effective dispute resolution often involves a blend of strategies. Sometimes direct negotiation is the best approach. Other times bringing in a neutral third party, like a mediator, can help facilitate a more productive conversation.
This brings to mind those legislative changes we discussed earlier, the increasing emphasis on pre-filing dispute resolution
Yeah.
in legal cases. It really highlights the value of exploring those alternative avenues before resorting to litigation.
Absolutely. These legal frameworks, they reflect a broader societal shift towards recognizing the benefits of collaboration and consensus building. And these principles, they can be applied in all areas of life, whether it's a workplace conflict, a family disagreement, or a community dispute.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question. How can you become a more skilled and effective dispute resolver in your own interactions?
That's a powerful question. I encourage everyone to reflect on their own experiences with conflict. What patterns do you notice in your own communication style? What triggers your emotional responses? By becoming more self-aware, we can start to identify those areas for growth and develop strategies for engaging in disagreements more constructively.
I love that. It's a call to action for all of us to become more conscious and intentional in how we approach conflict. And by doing so, we can contribute to building a more harmonious and collaborative world, one conversation at a time.
Well said. Remember, conflict is inevitable, but how we choose to engage with it can make all the difference.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and practical strategies for navigating disputes, conflicts, and problems more effectively.
And we look forward to continuing the conversation in our upcoming deep dives, where we'll explore related topics and delve deeper into this fascinating world of dispute resolution. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep seeking common ground.
We've been talking about conflict and how it can be an opportunity for growth. I think that's a really interesting idea, but it seems like a lot of people, they just see conflict as something negative to be avoided.
Right. It's definitely a shift in thinking. We're often taught to avoid conflict, but the truth is it's a natural part of, any relationship, any interaction. It's bound to happen when people have different needs and perspectives and values.
So how do we embrace that? How do we actually move from fearing conflict to seeing it as a chance for growth?
Well, a big part of it is understanding ourselves and the role that we play when conflict arises.
What do you mean by that?
Well, every single one of us, we bring our own unique experiences and biases to the table, right? And those things, along with our communication styles, they all influence how we perceive the conflict, how we react to it, and how we ultimately try to resolve it.
So self-awareness is really key here.
Absolutely. The more aware we are of our own triggers, those things that make us react in certain ways, and our communication patterns, the better we'll be at navigating conflict.
How can we actually work on that self-awareness?
Well, one simple way is to just pay attention to yourself when conflict happens. Notice how you react when someone challenges you or disagrees with you. What are your go-to responses? Do you get defensive or maybe withdraw or become aggressive?
Hmm. It's almost like a form of mindfulness, isn't it?
Yeah.
Paying attention to what's going on inside without judging yourself.
Exactly, and that's a skill you can practice. Another really helpful thing is to get feedback from people you trust. Talk to friends, family, colleagues, and ask them how they see you handling conflict. Sometimes they can point out things you don't even realize you're doing.
So it's about being open to feedback, even if it's not always easy to hear.
That's right. The more we understand ourselves, the better we'll be at navigating conflict. And that goes for understanding the other person involved, too.
Yeah, so how does that understanding of the other person play into engaging with conflict constructively?
It's just as important as understanding ourselves. And it comes down to empathy, being able to see things from their side, even if you don't agree with their point of view.
Empathy. That sounds like a tough one, especially when you're in the heat of an argument.
It can be challenging, for sure, but it's essential if you want to build understanding and find some common ground. When you try to see the world through their eyes, you're more likely to find solutions that actually work for both sides.
And active listening is a big part of that, isn't it? Really hearing what the other person is saying, not just waiting for your turn to talk.
You got it. Active listening is so important in communication and conflict resolution. It means paying attention to their words, of course, but also to their body language and tone of voice. Those nonverbal cues can tell you a lot.
So it's about being present, being engaged, showing that you genuinely care about what they have to say.
Absolutely. That creates an environment of safety and respect, and it can help to de-escalate things and get people working together.
These are all really helpful skills. But what about those times when communication just breaks down? What happens when emotions are running high and, it feels impossible to find any common ground?
In those situations, it can be really helpful to have a neutral third party step in, like a mediator.
Like
They can help guide the conversation, make sure people are communicating clearly, and explore different options for a solution.
So a mediator basically acts as a facilitator, helping everyone navigate the conflict and hopefully find a way forward.
That's right. Mediation can be a really good way to resolve disputes without going to court, which can be, costly and damaging to relationships.
And it seems like that aligns with the shift we've seen in legal frameworks like the Civil Dispute Resolution Act, where alternative dispute resolution is becoming more and more important.
Exactly. There's this growing recognition that going to court should be the last resort, not the first option. Litigation often makes things worse, but mediation and other ADR methods, they focus on finding solutions that work for everyone.
That makes sense. So it sounds like there's a big shift happening in how we approach conflict. We're moving away from that win-lose mentality and towards a more collaborative approach where everyone can benefit.
Precisely. And this isn't just happening in legal settings. It's something we're seeing in workplaces, communities, even personal relationships.
That's really encouraging. So for our listeners who want to embrace this shift, what are some practical steps they can take to become better at resolving disputes?
Well, I'd say the first step is to really commit to developing those communication skills we were talking about. Active listening, empathy, assertive communication. These are all things you can work on. There are lots of resources out there, books, workshops, online courses.
Great. And what about when you're actually in a conflict? Are there any strategies you can use in the moment to try and de-escalate things?
Definitely. One really effective technique is to simply take a time out. If things are getting heated, just step away for a bit and give yourself a chance to cool down and think things through.
So rather than reacting in the moment, take a break, gather your thoughts.
Exactly. Once you've had a chance to calm down, you can approach the situation with a clearer head and a more constructive attitude.
What about when you're dealing with someone who's just being really difficult or unreasonable?
In those cases, it's important to remember that you can't control how they behave, but you can control your own response. Focus on staying calm, being assertive but respectful, even if they're not. Sometimes disengaging from the negativity is the best way to de-escalate things.
That's a good point. It's easy to get sucked into their drama, but you're responsible for your own reactions.
Exactly. And remember, even really tough conflicts can be opportunities for growth. If you approach them with a positive attitude and a willingness to be open and honest, you might be surprised at how things can turn around.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of these insights today. This has been a really eye-opening deep dive. Do you have any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
Just remember that conflict is a part of life. But how you choose to deal with it, that's what really matters. By learning these skills and changing your mindset, you can turn disagreements into chances to grow, understand each other better, and make things better in the world.
That's a great message to end on. Thank you again for joining us. And to all our listeners, thanks for being a part of this deep dive with us. We hope you found it helpful. Remember, conflict is inevitable, but it doesn't have to be destructive. You have the power to make a difference. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep seeking common ground.